So we will have a tour guide both in Israel and in Jordan. Those are one of the things that can be a little bit difficult about this is that we're used to when we go around and we see historical sites in the United States, there are almost always plaques and lots of stuff to read, and there's all kinds of markings and things like that. Almost never is that the case as we tour places in Israel and Jordan. It's always, there might be a little sign that says, oh yeah, this is this, but no dates, no description, so there's nothing to stop and read, and you do need to, to listen to the tour guide, and my sort of cynical view of this is that that's part of the way that they make tourist dollars. But it is what it is, and they're all very knowledgeable. I've never had a case where a tour guide has said something to us and said, here's the way this really was, blah, 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 and I thought, no, that ain't right. If that happens, later when we're in the hotel and we're having a beer, I will tell you about that, but I will not tell you that there, yes.
I just want to, ask a little bit more background question. I know we're going to be focusing on history and archaeology, but how much are we going to get into talking about the present situation in Israel?
Next time I will do a little bit on the sort of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, what we're going to see and not see and do and not do on that. That's very complex and it's highly politicized. So there are almost always when you talk to people, people are going to want you to drink the Kool-Aid of one side or the other.
Yeah.
I'm not going to ask you to drink either Kool-Aid.
Right, yeah.
That said, it's always a good thing to listen to people. What I have found personally, as I've just sort of, because we will have time to, we're going to stay in Jerusalem. We're going to stay in a hotel owned by Palestinian Christians. So they're sort of neither fish nor fowl because they're Palestinians but not Muslims, and they're not Jews and they're not Israelis. We're gonna walk through places where we're going to be in areas that are run by the Palestinian Authority. So Bethlehem is run by the Palestinian Authority. You can't go to Bethlehem without. You'll see people that we're going to be in places in Israel where there's almost no Palestinians, it's all Israelis, and so we'll have a chance to listen to lots of different people. One of the things that Ted Bishop Schneider always told me was, and I still believe this is the right attitude. We don't live there. We're not there. We're there to listen, not to tell people what our opinions are, and blah, blah, blah. But it is interesting to listen to what people have to say, and it's part of what I have found is that when you listen to just rank and file people, not the people somebody says, you need to listen to this person tell you the Palestinian side, this person tell you the Israeli side, blah, 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 is that most people just really want to live their lives, go to school, go to work, go on vacation, raise their kids, and they want to live in peace with each other. There are fringes on both sides that are trying to always push the envelope and create conflict, and unfortunately, fringes on both sides run governments in both sides right now, so that's difficult. But I'll get into that. I'll get into that some next time because there are things that you're just going to see, and I want to encourage people to listen to, because we're not going to solve the problem. We're not going to learn anything. But you do get a sense. You do get a sense afterwards when you listen to people that both sides want to portray themselves as victims. Both sides have legitimate grievances that can actually say, look, do you know what it's like to have this happen to you? No, I actually don't. If those people that remember, think about how long I've been here, 2002, we had a sniper incident. People were worried about somebody's going to shoot you while you're standing at the gas station. That's the closest I've ever come in my life to thinking about I could just walk out on the street and somebody could shoot me. I don't live with that on a daily basis. So we'll cover some more of that. Today what I want to do though is I want to just talk about in general about what we're going to do, what we're going to see. Because part of the problem that I think I was telling Pastor Christine is one of the things that I found even the second time around, we go to these places, we look around, you see stuff, you get back in the bus, you see more stuff, you get back in the bus, you see more stuff, and at the end of the day, you're like, what the hell did I just see? And part of the problem, so there's a couple of things, part of the problem is we're going to be seeing things that are all commingled together. You're going to be seeing a site which has Crusader era ruins at the same point as you see first century era stuff, and it's all commingled together. And trying to figure out which is which and what you're, so even figure out what you're looking at can be difficult. Those things are mixed together. It can be really overwhelming. People will, the tour guide will tell us things. Whatever ability you have, whatever's the best thing you have to take notes, whether it's on your phone or in a notebook or audio recorder, whatever you have, that can be useful. We should all have these little headphone systems that will be able to, the tour guide has the only microphone, not me. So the tour guide will say things just like in a voice like this, and we'll all be able to hear where we are, as long as you're within, actually quite a long distance, because I took a group of people up to the top of Bet Shean, and the tour guide in 2013 was way down in the Roman amphitheater, and he said on the thing, he said, "Can you hear me? Do you know?" And I waved at him, and it was like 200, 300 yards away, so it was good. But don't ever wander 300 yards away from the group unless, you know, somebody has told you, yes, we know you're going to be over 300 yards away from the group. But anyway, today's session is going to focus on history and archaeology, things that help, I hope, to make better sense of why some of these places are important. Why were they important in the Bible? Why were they important outside of the Bible? Gives you some insight into, in some ways, why some of these things are still important today. So to start out with, I'm going to use this pointer because you can actually see. Some of you have seen this picture before. This is the Damascus Gate in Jerusalem. This was from 2013, and I am sitting there in front of the Damascus Gate, which is this gate on these walls. These walls around Jerusalem. This is one of the gates into the old city of Jerusalem. These walls date to the 16th century. They were built by Suleiman the Magnificent, who was the Ottoman Sultan, who at the same time he was building lots of stuff over here, was also besieging Vienna, creating a problem for the Holy Roman Emperor, who wanted the Lutherans and the Catholics to stop fighting each other and fight him. So that's your piece of Reformation history with this piece of Jerusalem. He's all over the place. He built these walls on top of the Roman walls from the 2nd century. This little gate, can you see the little gate at the top of the arch down here? That is the Roman gate from the 2nd century that was in that. That's actually one of the ways that we know where the wall was. That wall, none of these walls were there during Jesus' crucifixion. That was still outside the city. So when we go into that gate, through that area, that's where we find the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. That's where the Temple Mount is. That's where the traditional site of the crucifixion and burial are. They were outside the city walls at the time of Jesus. These walls were, the first walls were built there about maybe 60 AD, something like that. The Romans raised the city. I'll tell you more about that, and then built that. So you're going to see that this part of it is just sort of an illustration of. You're going to see a lot of things. You're going to say, "There's the Damascus Gate." Like, wow. 16th century, 2nd century. Notice also, I'm sitting on the little bar here at the street level, today's street level. This was the street level in the 16th century. Way down there was the street level in the 2nd century. So you've got the topography, working against you in some of those things too. I want to start though by talking about some of the basics of geography in the Holy Land that help you to understand some of the stuff. I have frequently said in other venues that the Holy Land, the area we think of as kind of like Lebanon and Israel, is like the Delaware of the Middle East. In the sense that if you drive from here to New York on 95, you got to go through this tiny little strip of land where they toll you to death, because there's no other really easy way to get from one place to the other. I go through Pennsylvania. But anyway, this is why. So this is the area we're going to be seeing in here. This is Jerusalem is here. It's still there. This is northern Israel, Lebanon, like this. In the ancient world, 2000, 3000 BC, there are big empires. We got the Persians over here, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Egyptians down here, somewhere back down in here. we've got the Ethiopians, the Hittites. Remember in the Bible, there's talk about the Hittites are over here, and then farther out here you got the Greeks and the Romans and things like that. The trade routes and the routes that you would need for military purposes all have to flow through this area around the Euphrates and down through here. This is what we call the Fertile Crescent, this area here, because all of this is just desert. You can't move that way. So you have to come up here, and if you want to get down and do trading here or reach the Mediterranean or come from here and go up or back over here, this little slip of land, you want to control that. You want to have that. You want to be able to either militarily hold it so that your enemies can't get you, or you want to own it so that you can tax people who come through here. That's why everybody wants this piece of land. The Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans, everybody wants this piece of land. So we read in the Bible that there's a sort of a way of the prophets talking about, why is everybody always picking on us? Why is everybody always beating up on us? And the prophets say, well, it's because we let the deal go down. We did not keep the covenant with the God of Israel. We have not let our end of the bargain, And that may be true, but if God needed actual volunteers who wants to go beat up on the Jews, he's got lots of volunteers because everybody wants this strip of land. And that's why the place we're going to be seeing is not a backwater. It was never a backwater. It was always an area of great trade, lots of cultures, lots of different peoples were always there. And so you see, we're going to be seeing things that are the result of many, many peoples living in that part of the world, all interacting with each other and all adding influences, architectural influences, cultural influences, religious influences, things like that. Point out that I use this map here. Distances are extraordinarily small. Here is the thing here, 20 miles. So 20 miles, I was talking to Terry earlier, so up here is the Golden Heights. From, and they are called the Heights because they are heights. They are large elevation. One of the reasons that Israel will never give back the Golan Heights to Syria is that even using Vietnam-era artillery, if you park some artillery up here, you can hit all of this there. I mean, you can hit the sea. Some of you guys know Bill Atchison. He's a retired Army officer. Somehow we were talking about this trip or whatever, and he says, as an Army officer, he says, I was always taught to fight in depth, meaning, that you have space that you can trade to get yourself in a strategic position. He says there's like two places in the world you cannot fight in depth. One is the DMZ in Korea, and one is this. There is no place to fight in depth. So this has always been an area of tight conflict, just because the distances are so small. In spite of the fact that the distances are so small, so we're gonna land in Tel Aviv, which is Jaffa. Basically, Tel Aviv and Jaffa are the same place. Going up to Galilee, you're going to be traveling 50 miles, and then you're going to come down here and you're going to go up there. So we're not traveling long kind of geographic distances. However, we are traveling. The topography is the first thing I want you to pay attention to because while the distances are small, the changes in elevation can be great, and that's because out here is all desert, but there are certain most of up here is very mountainous and very hilly and lots of trees and things like that. It's very hard to get through. Where you have your nice trade routes, this shows the trade routes at the time of Herod. So you have right along the coast. You have this King's Highway. If you're going to do Jordan, we will travel some of the King's Highway. It's still there. It's paved now. I'm trying to take a bus on it. Down here, but the major trade route that comes from places that are now today Iran, Iraq, that were Persia and Syria and Babylon and stuff like that, come through here. You come down this way where you can still follow the rivers, and then there's a cut in the mountains right here. It's the Jezreel Valley, and then you continue down this way. So if you own this area, whether by conquest or because you live there or whatever, in order to secure this whole area and keep this under your control, there are 3 places that you want to hold on to. Someplace down in here, which blocks your southern route, someplace up here, which blocks the northern route, and you absolutely got to control the Jezreel Valley, because that's the cut through. So if anybody gets from the north or the south, that's where you've got it. So Solomon, during the time, the time of David and Solomon are the key moments of like the Jews own everything. You know, like we have control of we have control of the area around us. We are safe. We are the military power in the world. Solomon sets up 3 chariot cities that all supposedly have 1,000 chariots, which is a mess because you need 3,000 horses, and that makes a lot of horseshit. But just try and keep 3,000 horses. And he sets up 3 chariot cities, and archaeologically we found they are exactly the same. One of them at Hatzor, up here, which is north of where the Sea of Galilee is. One of them at Gezer, which is down here. And the other one in this cut through in the Jezreel Valley, and that is the one we will visit, because that is, anybody know what that one that is? That is Megiddo. So that is, so the place of Megiddo, Har Megiddo, which comes through as Armageddon in the book of Revelation, right? So the reason that Megiddo becomes the real key thing in Revelation is because it's in this really strategic area here. That was the place where, you know, in the end, if you held that, you were good, and if you didn't, it all fell apart. So when the book of Revelation uses the you know, Armageddon as the place of the final battle, it's going to happen right there geographically. It's the symbol for the key strategic spot. This area also, and I'll show you. We have pictures, so it's better. But this area also here is very hilly. It's very different than down here, which is very desert. The hills, the trees, there's water up here. It's a nice place to hide out and not be found. You know, if you're trying to hide from the Roman army. And so the reason that becomes important is that this is all Galilee, right? So that's where the people who were what are called in the New Testament zealots. We go, what's a zealot? A zealot is basically a freedom fighter. They are people who are trying to knock off the Romans, and they go attack the Romans somewhere along the coast, and then go hide back up in Galilee. So as soon as as Jesus is brought to Pilate, and we say, this guy is Jesus from Galilee, immediately that has the same connotation for Pilate as, we think this guy's a terrorist, and we know that he just came back from Syria. Immediately you go, so it has that same connotation. You'll see when we're up there, it's a great place to get lost. Don't get lost. So, things you got to know about geographically as we're doing this. A tell. What is a tell? You'll see that name, like we're going to fly to Tel Aviv, right? So a tell is a mound, is actually a man-made elevation, and the way that it gets made is that when you have a strategic point. This is Megiddo, by the way. So Megiddo is because long before Solomon, it was still a strategic place, and it may have been slightly elevated, but a city is there, or a fortification. And some army comes along and knocks it down, so they build another one on top of it. And the next people build on top of that, and they build on top of that. So you're going to see levels of occupation in the same era. So during the, so here you can see, Megiddo, this is an aerial view of Megiddo that I didn't take. But you can see that the Jezreel plain, this is all completely flat, and that's why you want your fortification here. So when at the time of Jesus, Megiddo was just a mound. It was not being used defensively. So when we go there, you're going to see it more or less excavated to the time of Solomon, and we'll see the stables. We'll see what a manger actually looks like. It is not actually, because actually when they argue, you know, a lot of times in the Bible it's that some of the stories in the history that you have, this person lived to be 900 years old. They're like, I think that's a legend a little bit, maybe, who knows. So they would say the same thing about Solomon, you know, he had 1,000 chariots. And like, you need 3,000 horses, because you have to have 2 horses for each chariot, and then an extra horse for each, you know, to be spares. And there's no way to, it's really hard to have stabling for 3,000 horses. They did the excavation here, and there's stabling for 3,000 horses. It's really impressive, some of the stuff that they did. So watch when we go to different tells or different places like that. You're going to see these great big mountains, and they're going to point out different, you know, areas of occupation. Pay attention to those things. This is same kind of thing in Jericho. This is the tell at Jericho. This is my picture, and after we get done. To get this view, after we get done, at least both times that I've been there before, after we get done touring the tell at Jericho, they will take us to lunch. And you can buy lunch or, you know, sit there or whatever. If you get done with lunch early or you don't feel like eating that much, you follow me up to the roof of that building, and you get this view, which is really good. Here they have done something that we don't do archaeologically today, where they just took a bulldozer on, because you destroy everything. You know, you cut little pits like this, and you go down, because that way you can see what's in each level. But you will, especially in Jericho, you will see different, they'll be able to show you, and the tour guide will point out different areas where this was during Solomon's time, this was during the interesting thing here is that it's hard to date the Exodus. When did the Exodus happen? There are people that go, was it really there? But it's hard to date that. But the story is told that Joshua goes to Jericho, crosses in, blows the horns around the thing, the walls fall down, and you know, they conquer Jericho. So the interesting thing archaeologically about the tell at Jericho is that there is a burn line that you can see where the city was completely burned and destroyed. Absolutely raised. It's about that thick, which is huge in archaeological terms. That they date to about 200 years before the Exodus. So if Jericho was actually occupied by Joshua, and if that's true, if that timeline is correct, what they did was they marched around a burned out city and went, oh, we won. And it looks less like Ben-Hur and more like a scene from Monty Python. But you can learn interesting things from the archaeology. Distances, which are small, can have enormous topographical distances. So watch the topography. This photo is from, so this is the Jezreel Valley again. What you're doing is you're standing here at the precipice from Nazareth. Some of you have heard my stories about Luke. Luke tends not to have a real good grasp of geography in Palestine generally, so he talks about the Nazareth, where Jesus grew up, being built on the edge of a cliff. So there is this view that you can get, which is, you know, going down the mountains. It's about 4 kilometers away from Nazareth that you got to hike through. So if they were really chasing Jesus to the edge of the cliff, he had quite a long ways. He had 4 kilometers in deep forest to be able to get lost before you get there. But when you get to that area, you do see this really big, this great view of the here it's foggy and hazy, but you get a really nice view of the Jezreel Valley. But you get an idea of why, if you were a zealot and you wanted to hide out from the Romans, up here was a nice place to be. Down there was really strategic because that's the only flat place in what's otherwise just a sea of mountains. I think it was one of the, I think Rabbi Jacob used to tell the story. He said there were a number of Hasidic tales, including the one about when God created the universe. God gave 12 angels 12 bags of rocks and said, go distribute them throughout the world. And 11 of the angels, their bags broke over Israel. So you're going to see mostly stuff that looks like this when we're down Judea. So everything is really, there's a lot of desert, there's a lot of rock, there's a lot of hill. So when you talk about, you know, the hill country of Judea, it's all hill country. There's mountains everywhere. This is this little line going down here. You can sort of see with there's some vegetation on it. This is the road from Jerusalem to Jericho. This is the original. This is the first century road that from Jerusalem to Jericho, as the crow flies, is like Gaithersburg to Bethesda. It's nothing. but you're going down deep elevation changes. You're going into hot desert. There's nothing there. So one of the things that has been most helpful to me in doing these trips, and I hope it is to you too, is that when you see places like this, it makes the stories come alive in a different kind of way. When Jesus said, you know, 3 weeks ago, when in the gospel reading, when Jesus says, so a guy left from Jerusalem and was going down to Jericho. Everybody who heard that pictured this road. You know, we don't. We picture, you know, oh, I'm walking down from the street to the Starbucks. That's not. They all pictured this. And if you're stuck there, you are dead meat. And people understood that. And the elevation distance you're going to have there, when you leave Jerusalem, you're about 2,500 feet above sea level. When you get down to the Dead Sea, you are at 418 meters or so below sea level, which is about 1,300 feet below sea level. So you're going down 3,800 feet in the course of about 10 miles. We're doing it in an air-conditioned bus. That's a much better way to do that. And by the time that you are at this point, you are in an entirely different weather condition. I'm going to go back a second to the map. This whole area, so the Sea of Galilee is here. The Jordan River comes down, flows into the Dead Sea. It doesn't go anywhere from the Dead Sea. This is like a deep depression. If you look more carefully on your geographic maps, this is actually over a major fault line. The whole area is very. I've never been there during an earthquake, but there's fault lines all over the place. So when the psalmist speaks of the earth shakes and the mountains smoke, they're not being symbolic. They're talking about literally this happens. You're going to see a lot of really tortured geography where stones are just like this because of the way that things have shifted. But because of this, the temperature and the climate here are like southern Africa, because this actually goes down into Ethiopia, this fault line. So I am, back here. This is the same picture, set of pictures. I'm in fairly heavy jacket, and by the time we get down here, I'm in because we're hopping in the Dead Sea, and it's perfectly warm enough down there, and that's where a lot of the agriculture happens, which is why a lot of the water right now is being drawn off of the Jordan River, and that's why the Dead Sea is even deader than it used to be, and they are afraid that the Dead Sea may disappear entirely in another 50 years because there's so little water that's actually flowing into it. But so pay attention to those, the geography and the kind of conditions that people would have lived in different places like that. I also include the sign just to point out that even though there are some people who believe this, it is not possible to lower the bar too far for me. I have this picture to prove it. Remember also that ground level is probably quite far below where we're walking. People will sit there and go, "You are standing on the actual spot Jesus stood." Now there are a couple exceptions to that. A couple people have seen this story about the Jesus Road, where they've excavated down to the actual street level in the first century. There are places on that ends up at the top of the temple, which the Temple Mount to go. We will go onto the Temple Mount, but the way that people would have come up to the temple, they would have come up the road and they would have gone up these steps, and then they would have gone through a gate, which is for centuries been bricked off. But you can stand on those steps, and I remember I don't know if the story is true or not, but the tour guide said, Neil Armstrong stood here, and said, I walked on the moon, but this is more important because I stand exactly where Jesus stood. And that is a step where Jesus actually would have stood, because all the regular people would have gone up that way. So there are some places we're going to be able, but a lot of times it's going to be here, or it's going to be somewhere near here. So some things are reconstructed. And this was never pointed out to me before I did this trip, so I'll point it out to you beforehand. We're going to be seeing things that are quite ancient. Some of them are still standing, but some things are reconstructed. You will see lines like this. This actually says reconstruction lines. Everything below it was original. Everything above it is reconstructed, and actually that's the line right there. This is at Masada, and we will do Masada. It was not originally on the tour itinerary because I was dumb and left it off. But we will do Masada, and that will be part of the regular Israel tour. But you see here, there will be these lines, these black lines, and that shows you what was original.
Were you there in the same time of the year that we'll be there?
So this picture here where it was cold, that was not. That was in January, February, and that's the rainy season. Now the beauty of the rainy season is that when they talk about the desert blooming, I went through places like we're going down to Jericho. You're going through the area and it's been raining, and all of a sudden it's like there's grass, there's flowers. It's really kind of cool. The drawback is it was raining a lot. And that's not pleasant. The first time I was there about the same time we're going, the end of October, and that's usually a really nice time. It's not too hot, it's not too cold, it's not raining. So we should have, cross fingers, knock on wood, we should have some good weather.
I'm willing in the creek's not rising.
Yeah. Well, the creek don't rise when it's not raining. So that's now there are places you'll see. It's like being in the West where they tell you, here's a gulch. And it's like there's no water for miles around until it rains, and then you have flash flooding, and you see that same kind of thing going on in the Middle East. I will talk more about some of these things, some of these places individually, but we're going to be going to a number of places, and that they will tell you, this is the place where this happened. And so the question is, how do we know that this is the actual place? And so we need to ask a couple of questions about that. The first is there an actual biblical record of the place? Does the Bible actually say, in this place this happened? For instance, we will be on the Mount of Transfiguration, the actual mountain where Jesus was transfigured before his disciples, and his clothes became dazzling white, and blah, blah. If you are remembering all of your transfiguration stories, what is the name of that mountain in the Bible? You don't remember. You know why you don't remember? It's not named. There is no name of that place. So it's just Jesus took the disciples up a high mountain. Now when we get in the middle, it's implied it's in Galilee. We will be on the top of a high mountain in Galilee, but there's all high mountains in Galilee. Which mountain was it? Who knows? But we're on a mountain in Galilee, and somehow or other, so is there an actual place? Opposite example, Jesus goes into the synagogue at Capernaum. Okay, so we know where Capernaum is. We know where the synagogue was in the first century. At least we know that, and we will see that also. That there was an actual place, and we know where that. We have an idea of where that place is. There are other places that are iffy. We will see a couple of places on the Sea of Galilee where this is the actual place where Jesus, broke the loaves and the fishes and things like that. It's on the Sea of Galilee, at least where the sea is today. Could have been here, somewhere around here, probably was, but not, there were places that, particularly in the Byzantine era, there will be like these, I didn't put a picture of this, but these plaques, these like silver, gold, marble, John the Baptist was born on this spot. This is the very spot where Elizabeth squatted and gave birth to John the Baptist. Who knows? You'll see some of those. You'll see some of those places. And then, is there archaeology connected to it? That's the other thing. Do we have any? And because archaeology is not connected to it, doesn't mean that it didn't happen. But because one of the things that you find is that we have such information overload in our society. We have such, we have records of everything and records of records and records of, all kind of records in first, even back to the first century, even the Romans, who you think of as having all of these, great records. There's very little archaeological evidence, even the people that we read about in the Bible. So Pontius Pilate, who factors big, in the New Testament, there were some records of, or Josephus wrote about the trouble that Pontius Pilate got into and things like that. But there was no archaeological record of Pontius Pilate, the person, ever actually existing in Israel until they were renovating the Colosseum, or not the Colosseum, the amphitheater in Caesarea. And there was a seat that they were taken out, and on the back of that, it turns out that stone had been a stela, some kind of official sign thing that they had reused as the seat at some point. And that sign had actually the name Pontius Pilate on it and his title. That's the only actual archaeological record we have of Pontius Pilate. So we want to see. I ended up on a jury, which no pastor should ever be put on juries. And one of the problems when you serve on a jury, especially in Montgomery County, is that everybody watches CSI and wants to see all kinds of intricate evidence that no one really actually has. We sometimes go to look for archaeology, and we expect all kinds of archaeology that really isn't there. But some of the stuff that is there becomes really fascinating. One of the things that is really fascinating, or a piece of the archaeology, is the Manava map. This is a floor mosaic in a 6th century church in Jordan. If you're going on the Jordan trip, you will actually visit this place and see this map. It was uncovered in the late 19th, early 20th century when the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire allowed the Christians to rebuild churches where there had been churches. They were not allowed to build new churches, but they could. So they started to renovate where the St. George's Church had been on the Jordanian side, and discovered that what this was an actual pilgrim's map of the whole Holy Land. This what you're seeing right here is Jerusalem. But it was a map of where stuff was and what you would see there. And while we pull out our Bible maps, our Bibles in the back has a map that says this is exactly where everything was. Some of that is a guess, and based on some archaeology, but we don't know a lot of that stuff, and you can't dig in places very often like Jerusalem because they're living cities. They're places where people are, so you can't really see that. But in the 2nd century, Hadrian, who is the other guy that builds everything, because he's built Hadrian's Wall in England as well as he's, they've decided he's going to completely raise, Jerusalem has been destroyed in 70 AD. We're going to clear it off. We're going to create a completely new Roman city on top of it, which is one of the reasons the distances are so great. And he creates a Roman city. I'm going to show you. You can buy the poster, which shows it better. This is this in Greek says the holy city of Jerusalem, and then it's broken off. But the Romans, when they built a city, would have one big, large main street called the Cardo, and it was lined with, you see the little columns on both sides of the street. So it showed that that's how they actually built the city, and so people started digging in Jerusalem and said, wonder if that's actually accurate or not, and they did in fact find that they found the Cardo, they found the steps, they found, this is, reset up and everything. But that's the only record we have of what Jerusalem looked like in the Byzantine era, the 5th, 6th century. Niels and I were having discussions on cats and things like that at happy hour one time. Feral cat here. If you like feral cats, you will love Jerusalem. There are more feral cats running around in Jerusalem than I have ever seen in my life. I do not know what. So you'll get to see all kinds of really interesting stuff like that. So pay attention to the archaeology, pay attention to the geography, the distances like that. Want to give you just some basic historical overview because there are certain eras that I'm going to talk about. I have used here BCE and CE. Are people familiar with those terms? So since BC, standing for before Christ, and AD, Anno Domini, the year of the Lord, are really Christian ways of numbering things. The more kind of ecumenical thing, and you'll see this in a lot of the literature that we'll see, uses Common Era and before the Common Era, since especially when we're walking around places where very few people are Christians. So we don't actually know a lot archaeologically and historically about things before, they're learning more, but before the time of David and Solomon, when Israel comes into the land and settles the land after the Exodus and things like that. But people, they've just dug up a city outside of Jerusalem that was there like 3,000 years ago. People live in that, and Jericho is continuously occupied for about 10,000 years. People lived in this land partly because it was part of the trade routes that people would follow for a long time. So you read about all these, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, the Hittites, all kinds of people are all commingled in there. The time that ends up, one of the times that ends up being huge, at least in terms of biblical history, is the time of David and Solomon. David pulls all the tribes of Israel together, creates a united kingdom, and when he dies, Solomon becomes the king and keeps the kingdom united and expands it a little bit. So this is kind of the golden age of, especially for Jews today, this is the golden age, about 1000 BCE, of Israel expanding its borders. Everybody's safe. The trade, they're the ones collecting the toll. Nobody's conquering them and coming in and beating up on them. This is like the golden age. After Solomon dies, the kingdom gets split up again. That starts the eventual downfall. The Assyrians come in, conquer the northern kingdom, the area that we'll think about as Galilee today, and then the Babylonians come in and conquer Jerusalem about 587 BC. They raze everything. They destroy everything. And for about 70 years, what you do when you conquer an area, what you would do in those days is to take to destroy any fortifications. So they destroy Jerusalem because Jerusalem is a military place that you can hide behind walls and things like that. So they break all that stuff down, and they take all of the officials, all of the people that, and anybody who's, architects, engineers, people that would be helpful in terms of figuring out, how to organize resistance, and they deport them all over the place. And they often make them, so the stories of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are these Jews who are governors in provinces, but not in Israel. They're governors other places, and they bring the other people in, and they make them governors in Israel, and things like that. But because kingdoms keep, getting conquered by other kingdoms, 70 years later, around 539 BC, the Persians conquered the Babylonians, and in order, under the rubric of, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, decided to make friends with the conquered peoples, and they let a lot of people go home, so they let the Jews return to Jerusalem. So the Jews come back to Jerusalem, they rebuild the temple, and they continue to more or less exist all right until Alexander the Great shows up around 330 BCE, and the Greeks, and that's why Greek ends up, because they're the first really big international, they conquer everything, so everything is written in Greek. Everybody knows Greek. So the reason that John talks about the sign on top of the cross is written in Hebrew, in Latin, and Greek. It's It's written in those three languages because Hebrew is the local language of the people, Latin is the official language of the Roman Empire, and Greek is the international language. And when they crucify somebody, they don't crucify somebody up there on the hill where we can bow down and kneel and adore. They crucify people right next to the street where everybody can see, where they can bleed on the people going by, where it's gory, and everybody can read. This is what happens to you if you do this. But they do that in Greek because everybody, that is the international language, much as English is the international language today. You will not have trouble with English anywhere we go. So that ends up being a time when the Greeks desecrate the temple. They put the pagan stuff in there. Judas Maccabeus leads the revolt. They take the temple back, and they find that the lamp only has 1 day's worth of oil, but it burns for 8 days, and that's where Hanukkah comes from, things like that. So they end up, and this is after the time of Alexander, except for Alexander dies, it gets split up into 4 different people, none of whom really have much power, and that's why they can take advantage of that. The Romans arrive about 63 BCE and take over everything. Now, normally what the Romans do when they take over an area, they don't want to militarily occupy it. They want to do what everybody else did, is to say, all right, we're going to set up our puppet king, and that king has authority. The only thing is that king has to be able to make sure that, make for damn sure that the trade route stays open, and we collect the taxes, and that we're able to, because Rome is better understood as Rome Incorporated. They want the money. So Herod the Great ends up being their guy, and he rules with an iron fist. And he does a lot of the stuff that we're going to see. He's the guy that rebuilds the temple, expands on the temple. The temple's already there, but he ends up doing a lot of the expansion. So the western wall, the Wailing Wall that people have seen where you stand at the wall, is not actually the wall of the temple. It is the retaining wall that Herod built out so that he could expand the whole mount that everything was on. He did a lot of things in other parts. You're going to see a lot of Herod the Great stuff as well. The Jews revolt in 70 AD. The Romans say, this is nuts, we're not dealing with this anymore. They completely destroy Jerusalem, they completely destroy the temple, they push the stones off the temple, off the mountain entirely, raise the entire thing, forbid Jews to enter Jerusalem except during 1 or 2 days a year for festivals, and that includes Christians. So whenever anybody says, Jews couldn't do blah, 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 anywhere in the first century, that includes Christians, because Christians were just thought of as a Jewish sect. The Romans rebuilt Jerusalem in about 130 with that Pardo that I showed you. And then Helena, who is the mother of Emperor Constantine, is the person who is most. She is a Christian well before Constantine is, and she actually is a Christian. It's not entirely clear that Constantine ever really was. He got baptized, but she really was interested in finding some of the sites, and some of the sites that we will see in Jerusalem, she found by saying, where did you plop pagan temples? Because what the Romans did when they rebuilt the temple, when they rebuilt the city in 130, was they made for sure to take pagan temples and plop them over sites that were considered to be holy to Jews, including Christians. So the reason that we will, so the church of the Holy Sepulchre, and they're not alone. This is how we found. How do you find the temple of the Aztecs? You look for the cathedral in Mexico City because they plopped it right over the top. This is what people. So she found several of the sites are preserved because of that. So one of the things, but even by 335, you're still you're 300 years removed from some of the events that happened in the first century, but not that far removed that there are some generations of people who go, we remember where this happened. We got told by our grandparents or great-grandparents, things like that. There are other sites that we're going to see where they date to a time of perhaps the Middle Ages, because some knight on a crusade had a dream that said this rock was the actual spot that, so, that's another thing to ask yourself. So we'll see a bunch of stuff. So, it goes from, so this is, when we go to Beit Shean, this is the remnant of the 12th century BCE Egyptian. So this dates to the time of the Exodus, pretty much, on the top of Beit Shean. Beit Shean, so this city is another one of those things. It's one of the cities of the capital, so it's a Greco-Roman city in the 1st century. It is the city in the Old Testament where Jonathan and David's bodies were hung once they were captured and killed. And when you go up to the top of that, it has from 1,000 years before that, it has history. So there are some excavations, like this is a chunk of what they believe the wall was, the wall around the city of Jerusalem was during the time of Solomon. They, you'll look at your Bible maps and it'll go, well, the wall was here, but we only know like little itty bitty places where there have been excavations where we're pretty sure that was. And you'll get a chance to see this. So these are the stones that were part of the temple that the Romans pushed off, and you could now, hand is very short, but still you see these stones relative to people, and just the engineering feat of even to push those things off. But all of this is the Wailing Wall, called the Western Wall here. So all of this was part of the expansion that Herod the Great did. So you're going to see whole bunches of things like that. Next time, 2 weeks from now, I will work on more things about history that's helpful to know since the Roman period, because there's one of the things that we don't want to do is walk in there and say, I expect to see things exactly like it was when Jesus was here, because there's been 2,000 years of history since then, and that has changed things and moved things around. We'll do a brief overview of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, some of the things we will or will not see and talk about, and do some basic logistical things for the trip, things I want you to make sure that you bring, that you don't bring, that you have with you. We'll talk about currency, chargers, security, all kinds of stuff like that. And on the topic of security, fear not for any security things. If there's anything bad happening or potentially bad happening, we won't even know about it. They will move us around and they will do something different. That said, I've never had, the 2 times I've been there, there's never been anything where they've said, okay, we can't go over here today. It should be fine. And by and large, because the tourist shekel is very important to both the Israelis, the Palestinians, the Jordanians, the Egyptians. They all play nice to try to make sure that nothing interferes with the shekel. So one brief security story, and then I will take more questions. We were in, this was the 2013 trip. I was sitting with Pastor Endicott in the bar, which is nice, as far as I think, at the hotel up in Tiberias, and discovered that the Israeli Air Force had to have flown right over us to take out a Hamas convoy that had left Syria and was going into Lebanon. We discovered this because we had nice Wi-Fi in the hotel, and I was reading the CNN app, in which case what I just told you was reported by the Pentagon spokesperson and reported by CNN. CNN also pointed out that the Syrians claimed that the Israelis had flown over Syria and attacked their base in Syria. And the Israelis said, what rate? So, but if I hadn't been looking at my own, American news app, I would have known nothing about that. They will keep, that stuff happens and it will not affect us. So, I do questions about this or anything else.
So just one note, Wendy mentioned that August 10th, the Smithsonian is doing a lecture on the Dead Sea Scrolls. So if that's of interest to anyone, just look that on the
I've
website.
actually signed up for that.
Yeah. So that might be
So
some
it's an
background.
all day.
And we will go to Qumran, which is the place where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. Are people familiar with what the Dead Sea Scrolls are in general? In general, so they are mostly copies of and some of the oldest copies we have of Old Testament books, and they were the Qumran community, which we think is probably related to John the Baptist. We're not entirely sure of that. They were copied and kept by that community, and they ended up being placed in jars, the scrolls, and stored in these caves because it's so like the Road to Jericho's thing I showed you, how dry everything is. Everything was preserved, and nobody knew they were there until apparently a Bedouin shepherd was running through there and saw a jar, said, let's throw a rock in that jar. The rock broke the jar, and there's a scroll inside. And so they date to like the 1st century BC, something like that. So they do end up constituting some of the oldest written copies of the Old Testament we have.
Anything, I know your first answer might be the Bible, but aside from the
The
Bible.
Bible.
Anything else that would be helpful to read before we go?
I'm going to, well, I think, it's helpful to do any kind of like the Smithsonian things or things like that are useful to do. I'm going to try to, thinking of the Bible, I am going to try to send around a list of things you should, like we're going to go through Hezekiah's tunnel. So I'm going to send you the reference to that. So this was a story about Hezekiah cutting the tunnel, so that you have an idea of that. Some of the other things are more possible, I think. Yeah.
So I've had the time and the inclination to do some studying, and I've found a few things, and if you'd like, I can run up a couple of references. One that is just a great find for me is that through the Montgomery County Library system, they have a subscription to the Great Courses, which are these online video courses. If you have the time and inclination, there is one called The Holy Land Revealed. Jody Magnus is one of the great archaeologists currently working. She's at Chapel Hill, I do. She's currently doing an excavation in Israel. Her lecture series was absolutely phenomenal. And it really it was the 18-hour version of what Steve covered in 45 minutes. But really great to get a sense of just what's next to what.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I really appreciate what you're doing here, because we're going to be bombarded with so much, and I wanted to be able to see, I want to be able to understand what I'm looking at when I'm there, as opposed to 2 months later going, oh, that's what that is.
And you'll still have some of that, but I'm hoping that this gives you an idea of how the pieces fit together. One of the things I will make sure that they do for us, because it was not the first trip that I made, we're riding around on the bus, and we're stopping, stop, see this, stop, see this, stop, see this, and I said to the tour guide, I said, who was very knowledgeable but a little bit clueless on certain things, and I said, do we have a map? He said, well, don't worry, the bus driver knows where he's going. The bus driver knows where he's going, but I don't know where I am. Because it felt like I was in a Star Trek movie where you warp speed to someplace else, you beam down to this place, you beam back up, you warp speed, you beam down. How am I in relation to the other things? So I'll make sure that we have, second time we have maps. But
So just, if I didn't say this clearly enough, those lectures, which you normally can spend a lot of money on, they're free if you have a library card.
Okay, could you send us a
Yeah, I'll send
link
you
to
one,
what,
good.
so we know what we're looking for?
I think
Yeah.
So,
there's nothing you needed to do, but that would help with some of the overview stuff too. Right?
okay, another question. Can we take a swim in the Dead Sea?
Yes, we will swim in the Dead Sea. So one of the things I will make sure, there's a couple things to presage several things that I'll make sure everybody does. Bring shoes like Bob has on, so that we can, if we're walking through the Hezekiah's tunnel, because you're wading through water, so you want to make sure you have that. Always, everybody wear hats. Bring something, because the sun will rip the hide off you. And bring bathing suits for the Dead Sea. You will have one opportunity to swim the Dead Sea if you're just doing Israel. You will have 2 opportunities or 3 to swim the Dead Sea. And you don't swim in the Dead Sea, you float in the Dead Sea. So, because you have been in the Dead Sea. You actually, so the salinity of the Atlantic Ocean is like 4%. The salinity of the Dead Sea is like 40%. And so when you get out, if you wade out to the point where you can't touch bottom, your feet will literally be thrown up and you can't sink. Even in the 1st century, the Dead Sea was a tourist destination because they wanted to see a sea where the boat couldn't sink. Because the boat cannot sink. And that, what they will tell you is do not taste the Dead Sea. It is not only because it's full of heavy metals and other kinds of things that are toxic. So do not. So where we will go. So the place where the lowest bar in the world is, that's the Dead Sea beach, or one of them. I'm not sure which one will take us to, but there are always places to change and shower afterwards. So we'll be set with that. And we will do Masada, and a couple of other notes that I in emailing with Samantha. People who have not received bills, you're supposed to be getting reminders if you haven't gotten a final bill reminder, because a bunch of people had not gotten them. She also said if they're going to actually for those who are flying with the group, they're gonna ticket us in our names about the 1st of September. So so if you have a special request for a seat, like I want to have an aisle seat, I want to have a window seat, or whatever, let Samantha know that ahead of time, and she will try. But regardless, by the early part of September, we'll have tickets in our names, and we can just call Lufthansa and say, give me a seat assignment. That shouldn't be a problem. And we will do Masada, which is not the Masada is a really cool thing to do that I somehow or other I brain farted and didn't have that on the original thing, but it's a must see event. I have no idea what time it is. It's an hour. It's more than an hour. All right. Anything else? All right. Thank you all. We will see you all in August.